Hi, I'm Bob Perkins, and this is Aggressive Grace. Thanks for watching. Today I want to revisit the Joseph story because it's one of those great stories in the Bible. And today I want to look at two things. One, I want to look at God's intentionality in evil. And the second is God's training program and how God makes a leader. Let's talk a little bit in the beginning here about God's intentionality in evil. This is a little bit the deep end of the pool, you know. I mean, what is God doing here? Chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph says to his brothers, after it's all said and done, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. And it's the same Hebrew word, intended. We can't say what you intended for evil, God used for good. Well, that's true, but that's not the Hebrew meaning there. The Hebrew meaning is that God intended it. And so we're going to have to look at the intentionality of God in evil. Joseph is 17 years old when this story begins in chapter 37. He and his brother Benjamin are the two sons of the woman that Jacob really loved, and that's Rachel. And the other 10 sons are from different women. And those 12 become the 12 tribes of Israel. And Joseph, our first knowledge of Joseph is that at 17 years old, he gives a bad report of his brothers to his father. In other words, this kid is a little tattletale. Hey, my brothers aren't working hard. And Jacob, it's clear that he loves Joseph more than any of the other brothers, and he gives him this beautiful coat of many colors. And Andrew Lloyd Webber, thank you very much. And he sends him back. He sends him back to the brothers. Give me another report. Look, people don't wake up one day and say, I think I'm just going to be a jerk today. It doesn't happen that way. A principle of life. Everything happens for a reason. The brothers did not decide one day, hey, we're kind of bored, let's kill our little brother. It didn't happen that way. This had built up over a long period of time, and finally they had had enough. And they say, we're getting rid of this kid. First they are going to kill him, but then Reuben, one of the brothers, steps in and says, no, let's just throw him in this pit. And then they sell him into slavery, and they think he's gone out of their lives forever. The intentionality of the brothers had three intentions. One, physical harm. They wanted to kill him. Two, separated from him forever. And three, that he'd have a terrible life. But God had different intentions. God's intentions were to make him a great leader. In fact, his real intention here is that Joseph would be the leader that would take a family of 75, Jacob's family, and bring them into Egypt, where they would become a nation of over 600,000. That's God's intention, and he uses Joseph as the leader to do that. But Joseph's training program to become that leader is first a slave, sold into slavery. Second, he's a slave in Potiphar's house. And in Potiphar's house, he becomes head of running the whole house. But Potiphar's wife accuses him of sexual misconduct. By the way, nothing new under the sun in this world. And he's thrown in prison. So he goes from slave, Potiphar's house, now prison. And in prison, he winds up running the prison. Two guys from Pharaoh's staff are thrown in prison, a cupbearer and a baker. And they have dreams, and Joseph interprets the dreams. And he says to the baker, it's not going to go so well for you, but cupbearer, you're in good shape. And then there's a little verse I really never noticed before. It's at Genesis 40. And it's verses 14 and 15. And it says, this is what he says to the cupbearer. Remember me when it's well with you. And please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh. And get me out of this house. I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I've done nothing that they should put me into the pit. Joseph isn't sitting in prison happy about it. He's not content. He's not saying, well, whatever happens. No, he says, get me out of here. I'm unjustly imprisoned here. The cupbearer does indeed go back to Pharaoh, and Scripture tells us he forgets Joseph. How do you forget? I mean, the guy interprets your dreams correctly. How do you forget? The next thing is Genesis 40, verses 23 and then 41. Yeah, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Chapter 41. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh had dreams. Look, this is God's training program. 2 years. Joseph says, get me out of here. God says, 2 more years. What did Joseph learn in the training program? He learned humility. This guy who was favorite son with his beautiful robe and tattling on his brothers learned humility and servanthood. He learned leadership. He was in charge of Potiphar's house and then in charge of the whole prison. He learned justice and injustice because it had been done to him. And he learned patience. He learned to wait on God. You know, the intentionality of the brothers was that he would have physical harm, that he would be separated from them forever, and he'd have a terrible life. But God's intention was none of that. God protects him from physical harm. God never leaves him. And God gives him a great life. There's another point here I don't want us to miss. And that is that God was not punishing Joseph. At no point was God punishing him. God wasn't mad at him. I think sometimes maybe, at least for me, when things don't go the way I want them to, I think God must be angry at me and he must be mad at me. He's punishing me. It's not true. God is still using me. God's still molding and making me. And he's not finished with me yet. But we'd be remiss if we didn't also see the parallel between the Pharisees and their intentionality in evil. What did they intend for Jesus? They intended that he would have physical harm. They intended that he would be separated from God. And they intended that he would have, a terrible life. I mean, that he would be gone. But God's intentionality in the cross, God's intentionality in the cross is that Jesus would be that substitute for us. That because Jesus suffered physical harm, because Jesus was in that moment separated from God, and because Jesus took on that burden for us, we are never separated from God. We have an abundant life. And because Jesus conquered death, we have conquered death. One last note. If I may, on a personal level here, say that in those times in my life when people have intended evil for me, to me, on me, in those moments, I look back and realize that God was loving me more than I could have ever imagined. In those moments, God was molding, making, shaping me to be his person. In those moments, it's when the real question is, do I trust him? Do I trust that God and God's intentions are better, purer, and righteous when the intentions of man are not? I'm Bob Perkins. This is aggressive grace. Thanks for watching.